Welcome to the Field Notes podcast, presented by Seaworthy Functional Medicine. Seaworthy exists to help you overcome your complex health challenges so you can be fully vital. Now, here's your host, Dr. Rob Downey.
What happens when a thousands of years old tradition of healing with a great reputation for effectiveness meets the space age? Today, we are so fortunate to be joined by Greg Lee, an acupuncturist, a space scientist, and a 30-year clinician who's been helping people with very complex cases. Greg, thanks so much for joining Field Notes today.
Thank you, Dr. Rob, for having me on. I'm really excited to hear what we're going to talk about today.
Right on. My mentor is a Chinese medicine acupuncturist, and I meant to ask, is the proper honorific Dr. Lee? Am I missing? Are doctors of Chinese medicine, referred to as doctor?
I'm not that formal. You can call me Greg.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, my audience knows that it's somewhat rare for me to read the bio, but it's so important today and it's so interesting. We're going to do exactly that. Greg Lee, MAC, is the founder of the Lyme Research and Healing Center and a former NASA systems engineer who now specializes in complex chronic illness and neurological recovery. After developing severe IBS, anxiety, and insomnia while working on high-pressure robotics and science station projects, Greg experienced firsthand the limitations of conventional medicine. His recovery through acupuncture and integrative therapies redirected his career toward helping others who feel stuck despite normal labs. For more than 30 years, Greg has worked with over 1,000 patients dealing with Lyme disease, co-infections, mold toxicity, gut dysfunction, chronic fatigue, pain syndromes, and neuroinflammation. He applies systems-level thinking to identify hidden drivers such as stealth infections, toxins, inflammatory cytokines, mitochondrial stress, and nervous system dysregulation. At the core of his approach is the advanced medical scan, used to detect layered immune and neurological stress patterns. Treatment strategies may include frequency-specific microcurrent, molecular hydrogen therapy, nanoparticle botanical antimicrobials, functional medicine protocols, regenerative peptides, and Chinese medicine. Greg is known for translating complex biology into practical, structured recovery strategies, sequencing interventions to restore nervous system stability, cellular vitality, and long-term resilience. Wow.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I want to meet that guy.
I know. I want to meet that guy too. So cool.
Yeah.
Couple quick things as we drop in then. I've had very similar signs and symptoms during my medical career, and similarly feel indebted to the same approach that I've used for myself and informing how I show up for people and what gets me out of bed in the morning. And I just want to note that some of the things that you have success with are poorly responsive to conventional medicine or equivocally responsive. So last but not least, as we drop in, folks should just know at the front end of the podcast, some folks that I interview can be worked with remotely, but if people are interested in working with Greg, they need to be aware that the scan is mission critical to success. So you would want to think during today's podcast about not just learning something super interesting, but also that if this is something that might appeal to you or you're feeling stuck, you would need to travel to the East Coast. And what state are you in, Greg?
Maryland here.
Maryland. Right on. Well, great. So in this case, the bio is so helpful, right? Because it just gives us the scaffolding to help hang everything else on. So let's start with how hidden drivers like stealth infections, mycotoxins, and inflammatory cytokines keep high-performing patients chronically inflamed. And let's make sure and unpack what great topic, but there's a lot of medicalese in here. So let's put your feet to the fire to make it understandable.
Okay. So many of our patients come without a diagnosis. They've been to top medical institutions. We have one of the top ones in the country here in Maryland. And we get a fair number of people who've been there, but have received multiple diagnoses, medications, treatments, and they're still sick and struggling. And one of the most likely usual suspects is often mycotoxicity from environmental water damaged buildings, mold in their car or their home. And it's so stealthy, and in a lot of cases you don't see the mold because it's behind the wall, and the toxins just can go right through the wall board, and then people have these like unusual creeping symptoms that they're kind of like often below the awareness in the beginning, but then something pops up like anxiety in one patient, or bedwetting in kids, or other like people who have like fatigue, and they just find that there's no reason. Maybe they're stressed, or their doctor lab tests are fine. So, it's that story repeated hundreds of times over and over again. And then how do you find what is most important to treat in these patients when their labs are all great? Even their functional medicine practitioners are like, well, you probably need to detox your liver, or, and
Mhm.
but it's like, how do you do that? And so that was the conundrum for the first several years of my practice. It's like, okay, these are not easy patients. You know, I
Mhm.
started off with chronic pain patients and fibromyalgia patients, and a subset of the fibromyalgia patients got diagnosed with Lyme. And then the Lyme patients not only have Lyme, but they have parasites. They got mold, they got viral, Epstein-Barr, they've got nasal infections like Marcon, drug-resistant staph in their nose, and or interstitial cystitis. I used to work with this great practitioner. She's now retired now. She was in DC near me, where she worked with interstitial cystitis, bladder pain patients, and she do these like tests on them. We don't find anything in your urine culture. Then we start doing antibiofilm treatments on their bladder. Either they would do a bladder instill with things, or they would do like enema delivered remedies, and then that would get permeate into the bladder and break up this slimy stuff where all these bacteria or viruses or fungi are hiding. And then their urine cultures were like, whoa, like one woman, she had this fungus that's only found on the shores of the Aegean Sea in her pathogenous culture. And like, I've never been to the Aegean Sea, you know? Well, how did that get in your bladder?
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
amazing. Like
yeah.
this and all these other, people think it's Lyme, and then no, well, yeah, it might be Lyme, but there's this other toxin or this other like autoimmune reaction or parasite. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
It makes sense to me that somebody with your training would be capable of pulling this together because that's what I learned from Dr. Daly, my naturopathic doctor mentor and Chinese medicine acupuncturist mentor, is the remedies that have been developed over thousands of years were essentially sort of an ultra complex form of pattern recognition. And not only were complex remedies, but dealt with uh, used the Chinese medicine acupuncture operating system as a way to navigate through highly complex things and essentially sort of reboot the body. That's kind of how it felt to me being along for the ride. So it had never occurred to me how perfectly you'd be positioned to marry. Uh, and you're the only person I know who's married space age science with their training in this. So it's a singular opportunity for people to benefit. So this takes us to the advanced medical scan. How does this identify layered immune, mitochondrial, and neurological stress patterns? And by the way, mitochondria are the power plants of the cells. So no surprise, lots of people with these issues, the power plants are taking a hit. And if we can't make these energy packets in every cell of our body, we're underpowered.
Yeah. If you don't have energy in your mitochondria, you can't fight infections effectively. You can't detox,
Mm-hmm.
and your brain won't work very well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's often after the scan when we find energy deficiencies, whether it be in the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, thyroid axis, or mitochondrial energy issues. Then that helps us to know where do we need to nourish, where do we need to rebuild the energy, replenish the chi in the person, so they
Mm-hmm.
can start to get better, one feel better, and then
Mm-hmm.
their system has enough energy to fight the fight, detox the toxins, and do all the better functions that they need to be healthy. So this is key, and we find that it's not only remedies, but it's also therapies like red light therapy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the frequencies we use a lot is a 670 nanometer red infrared light. It's actually developed for NASA for use on a space shuttle mission where they had plants in space, and then they had one that they didn't put the light on, and one they put the light on. The one with the light grew like normal. The other one without the light, they grew all weird and stuff.
Mm,
So we
beautiful.
actually have one of those lights. We have a
Hmm.
NASA light that we use with our patients.
I love
So
this.
this has really helped patients like with neurological infections. One of them is a bacterial called Bartonella, and that can cause like OCD, anxiety, pandas, and kids, similar to the strep infection they get in their basal ganglion cingulate, where they have motor tics or they have like, all sorts of tremors or other kinds of issues that show up in PANS
Hmm.
symptomology.
Hmm.
And so when we put this light on these patients, that many of them describe like, wow, I feel like there's something like clearing from the light source across my brain, and it feels like it's wiping things out of there. So that
Hmm.
frequency is not, it's a more expensive LED, so it's not as popular as a 660 or the other frequencies. But this one uniquely has a really positive effect on certain infection toxic patients. So,
Mm.
all sorts of
Mm.
finds that we love in terms of helping people get their energy back, using functional medicine, glandulars, or other
Hmm.
kinds of supplements, NAD, mitosynergy is another, kind of one, like CoQ10 and the PQQs and all those. So
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Hey, let's pretend for a minute I flew out today and I was getting my scan. Is this like a donut, like a CAT scan, or is this a tube like an MRI? Is this electrodes? What should people know about being scanned? How's that feel?
the
How's that
hand
work?
interface actually that
Oh.
sends in electrical frequencies. So it's non-invasive. And then it reads a response back. So every half second, there's a, hey, how much Borrelia burgdorferi, or what's
Mm,
the status of the biliary trees or the gallbladder, or what's how
hmm.
much tumor necrosis factor alpha is there that we can pick up.
Hmm.
So it's like reading these things, and it can also test for remedies and treatments. So let's say there's an herbal that a person like, how about turmeric? How well do you respond to that? And it gives you a reading that can be, very high, which may indicate that's a good thing, or if it's very negative, then it's not always a good thing. So we kind of use that kind of uh, readings to kind of come up with a bigger picture, not just what infections, but also what functions, what energy, what detox blocks we need to overcome, what brain neurotransmitters need adjusting, whether it be a
Hmm.
GABA glutamate issue or serotonin, dopamine. And then we can craft strategies either through nanoparticle delivery and or like frequency specific microcurrent treatments to actually go and treat the actual organs deep in the brain or in the gut or in the liver and so on.
Mm. And when folks aren't in the Maryland area anymore, how does that just so I don't forget to ask, once they're unstuck, then are they kind of positioned to follow up with you from across state lines, or should they plan to be, flying from time to time for tune-up? Just,
Well, we
sometimes
try to
people,
work
yeah,
with each person based
yeah,
on their resources. And
yeah.
yes, we do treatments like the scan and then custom programming the scan data into their microcurrent
Hmm.
treatments. We're probably one of the only centers that I know that does that
Yeah,
in the US.
yeah, yeah.
So you got to come here, and then people can buy a unit and then treat themselves at home. That's something I do as my own personal
Hmm.
treatment. Like if
Hmm.
I'm going to bed, I know I need to prepare myself for this interview with you. So I did a sleep treatment program and
Hmm.
microcurrent, and that's
Mm.
affecting the pineal gland and
Mm.
also helping with melatonin production and all that.
Hmm.
So
Mm.
yeah.
Very, very helpful. Okay. Well, then let's segue into a Chinese medicine systems view of chronic Lyme and neuroinflammation. You've invoked a couple components, but let's dive a little deeper.
All right. So I was I used to work in a consulting firm called Lionheart, which is based in Portland, Oregon. And one of the partners in there, her husband was a Chinese medicine scholar, practitioner, named Dr. Heiner Fruoff. And I was out there, for a meeting, and then got to sit in on one of his trainings. And it was on this 2,000-year-old system where you had these patients. They had, multiple infections that were toxic, could have been like malaria, parasites, viruses, and that the normal treatments of the 2,000 years ago would be herbs or acupuncture or weren't working. And these patients wouldn't get better until they went to this special kind of physician who understood about how to detox out of the body these infectious toxins. And this is called goo syndrome. And so what they came up with is, hey, in the ancient texts, here are the treatments, here are the remedies that penetrate deep into the crevices and help clear out the toxins and the poisons and help replenish the energy. And so this is when he was saying this, I was like, this is exactly like my patient. This is like 25 years ago.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh my OMG, and he was doing medical scanning back then. And I'm like, okay, dude, I am like all over it. Thank you so much. And so that was like, okay, that's when I went into medical scanning. That's when I looked at, okay, what are the Chinese analogs of Lyme disease? So you don't have, well, now they have Lyme in China, unfortunately, but it was more leptospirosis remedies, which is another spirochete illness. What was effective in helping patients recover from that? So I took those remedies like forsythia and honeysuckle and andrographis, and then started giving those to patients along with detoxification and medicinal mushrooms. And lo and behold, yeah, my brain works better. I have more energy. I have less joint pain. And, they
Mhm.
were getting that kind of improvements when their medications weren't able to perhaps help them that much. So,
Nice, nice. It reminds me of my mentor 20 years ago. I saw these remarkable outcomes with autoimmunity and with very little intervention and no drugs compared to what I was doing. And I asked her if I got the functional medicine training, if I know what she was doing. She said, if you get the training, you'll do what I do. And I thought, yeah, all right, sign me up. So
yeah.
maybe a little bit of
Well,
a similar origin story. So let's go to frequency specific microcurrent. It's so interesting to me that there's a diagnostic aspect to frequencies, but there's also a therapeutic aspect to.
yes. So basically, there's microcurrent frequencies, just single channel or just one frequency, and that has been helpful in multiple studies, like 40 hertz with increasing memory in different animal and primate studies. And about 100 years ago, there was I think it was an osteopath or maybe some sort of medical provider that had this device that produced two microcurrent frequencies. And so this was forgotten about and then rediscovered probably about 20, 30 years ago. And there's a chiropractor, Dr. McMakin. She's on the West Coast, and she's really did a deep dive into this and taught, thousands of people how to use this kind of medicinal technology where you have one frequency that says, let's do inhibit this, Lyme disease, or let's detox this toxin, or let's lower inflammation. And then you have a location frequency you pair that with that says the midbrain, or the skin, or the liver, or the blood cells, or you can even target systems like the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, the limbic system. And so you can send in these frequencies. I was at a conference held by Dr. Lee Cowden in Texas, probably about, I don't know, probably over 15 years ago. I had a radiologist, and he said, okay, he's all this blow up of the brain. He goes, okay, this area of the brain, it's inflamed, right? Okay. Now I'm applying the anti-inflammatory frequency for that area, and you saw it go in like seconds. And I went like blew me away. I was just like, man, I need that because I got a lot of inflamed brain patients and I need to get it
Mhm,
down. And
mhm,
so that's when I was
mhm,
all into that. And I
mhm.
was there's an acupuncture physician, Shannon Gosen in Florida, who I had the great benefit of spending time with and taking her trainings. And that really helped launch into like, hey, this is like total NASA stuff because, I worked on the Hubble and like we're looking at stuff, 100 million miles away with this telescope. We should be able, and that's frequency medicine. That's like, okay, we're picking up frequencies. Why not do that? We're picking up the frequencies with a scan. We can send those frequencies into the body to heal it faster. And it's been a game
Mm.
changer for chronic pain, neuropathy, chronic inflammatory conditions, autoimmune conditions that have lots of inflammation. Because you can send anti-inflammatory frequencies into the joints. You can send it into the lymphatic system. You can send detox frequencies into the brain and help it to get the toxins out and drain more effectively. So this, once we have paired that with the scanning, it's like, oh, we got the map with the scan. Now we know where we need to apply those treatments for the biggest health improvements.
Mm. Well, I don't know you well enough. It does seem like you have a rare and wonderful mind to pull all of this together. So I think that's got to be a great blessing to your patients. And it also seems like me, you've had some incredible luminaries that have informed your ability to get to this mastery level. So isn't that a wonderful blessing?
Well, we stand on the shoulders of the people who trained us,
Hmm.
and hopefully
Hmm.
we honor them and pay it
Hmm.
forward to the next generation. We both have gray
Absolutely.
hair now, so, we've earned our.
Right. Right. Well, let's talk about nanoparticle antimicrobial botanicals and how those can improve penetration, disrupt biofilms, and support neurological recovery.
A lot of my patients have neurological infections, and it's very challenging because if you do too much killing in the brain, you release a lot of toxins that bumps up inflammation. And if the lymphatic drainage is not working effectively out of the head, then you get a flare up of swelling or headaches or dizziness and other symptoms. So what we have found is that in order to get these infections out effectively, we need to get through the blood-brain barrier more effectively. So I was at a training also where another physician, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, he's out in Washington State, and he was talking about nanoparticle delivery of like herbal extracts. And I went like, huh. And he says, yeah, in his German accent, he's describing how they go deeper in the cells and into the brain and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, being the geek, NASA dude I am, it's like, okay, so what you described is pretty straightforward. And now with AI, we can just, make it really complicated and buy all sorts of fancy equipment. But essentially, they're like little medicinal Trojan horses that have this little coating on the outside. We use a phosphatidylcholine, which cells use to repair themselves. So when cells see the phosphatidylcholine, they're like, "Oh, food, thank you," and they just suck it right in. And then the inner medicinal, whether it be a herbal essential oil supplement, and that is delivered in the cells or in the brain or in under biofilms where pathogens are hiding. So you can use them to detox. You can use them to drain inflammation more effectively, increase energy and vitality, promote healing in the nervous system, and also kill infection. So it really depends where a patient is at and what they can tolerate. So they may need more of the detoxification, energy building remedies first, and then later on switching more to antimicrobial like essential oils. Could be things like, oregano, cinnamon, and clove. Those are the top
Mm-hmm.
ones that Hopkins has found as effective against against Borrelia, Lyme disease, and also many co-infections from ticks. So.
Mm. And is the route of administration intravenous or oral or transdermal? And how do these things get into the body?
Since I'm not a physician, I can only do like oral. Some people do them rectal,
Mm-hmm.
but have to or topical in some cases. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
and then also we'll mix them with other delivery agents like DMSO for
Mm-hmm.
like joint pain, joint issues. This has been around for many decades as a
Mm-hmm.
strategy, and that's really also been helpful to get these remedies deeper into these like harder to reach areas like joints and the brain.
Mm. Awesome. I just love this. I'm just feeling all lit up. Let's do molecular hydrogen as well. This one's really fun.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, so what did I learn about hydrogen? Oh, I got this woman. She's a Lyme patient, and she kept emailing me. You have to do hydrogen therapy. You have to do hydrogen therapy. And I'm like, okay. I went to the International Lyme Associated Disease Society. They have these little tablets. You put it in a bottle of water, you shake it, and it dissolves. You drink it, and that's hydrogen water. And I was like, what is the big deal, lady? I tried it. Yes. She goes, no, it's not that stuff. This is actually where you buy a unit and you inhale it and do all this stuff and put it in your bath. And I'm like, really? I'm like, and she wouldn't leave me alone. I mean, it was like months, you know. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll try it, you know. So I got a unit, tried it, and I was just like, okay, actually, this is pretty good in terms of like having patients inhale it, and they're like, oh, they would come in, their brain is like in overdrive, they're these racing thoughts, and then they're on the hydrogen, inhaling it through a cannula, and then 15 minutes later, they're like, oh, I'm all chilled out, thanks. So it's just this rapid transformation, or brain fog patients, like other medical providers come, and these are people in like really advanced integrative clinics, and I'm like, what are you doing here, man? I love your clinic. It's like nothing I do, intravenous or topical or remedy wise, is cutting my brain fog. So they didn't have hydrogen, and when they get on the hydrogen, they're like, "Wow, that's 50% better." And so they buy units, and they have their patients buy units, and it's just fast detox. It's another one of my daily treatments that I do because in other studies, like animal studies, it shrinks cancer cells. So it's like hey, let's prevent my body from getting, cancer out of control as a way of like, I drink in the office, I have my staff also drink in the office and every day and inhale it at night. And that really has helped patients to sleep better. Great for insomnia, great for brain fog, great for neurological inflammation. It lowers multiple inflammatory cytokines, interleukins, tumor necrosis factor alpha. And so when patients do it, it's like, oh, that swelling or that pressure they feel in their head, oh, that's gone. That feels better. And it also increases cellular respiration. So your cells are like, oh, oxygen, hi, oh, great, I love it. And they breathe it in, and then they start dumping out toxins and metals. And with some patients that are highly metal toxic, they start to taste it in their mouth when they start to inhale it. So it's like, okay, with those patients, we have to slow dose it because we want to make sure their body can process the dumping of the metals and or toxins that are coming out. So, and the only contraindication is like with oxidative therapies, like ozone, peroxide, vitamin C, those will neutralize each other. So they have to be done apart from that. But otherwise, it's not really antimicrobial. It's really great for inflammation. Mycotoxicity also, another study lowers that too. So it's also been a game changer for many patients.
Thank you. Let's break it down a little in that it seems like to me, and again, looking forward to you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like that distinction you already drew, you mentioned two versions of this, one of which makes sense or passes muster, the other which doesn't. And even I think a bunch of the audience may be struggling just with high school chemistry here, right? Because they just think, an oxygen, two hydrogens, you know, they have this sort of swimmy way they get along with each other, and then when water freezes they're sort of stuck in relationship to one another. But there's a dimension then of what happens with these hydrogens that's really important when the hydrogen therapy is used properly. So uh, I'd love it if you break it down. I think a bunch of our audience is really interested, and they probably need to know how to distinguish the therapies that make sense as a trustworthy investment of their resources and what to, I'm not trying to pick on certain products or thought leaders, but I just think we've got to set a high bar on intellectual rigorousness on this one, probably, huh?
Yeah. So um, what I love about the research on hydrogen, they actually use it in hospitals in Europe
Mm-hmm.
and in Asia. And
Mm-hmm.
when you had the COVID outbreaks, I saw this video of this one COVID patient on a ventilator. He was conscious, but he couldn't even speak. And so they said, okay, now we're going to give him several hours of molecular hydrogen inhalation. And several hours later, they showed a video, hopefully it was accurate, of him talking.
Hmm.
And it just cleared out so much of the chronic inflammation that was in his lungs and his respiratory tract, and so that he could speak, whereas before he couldn't. And that was like also another like affirmation because I've been doing hydrogen for several years at that point that yes, this does pass like rigor. It's published
Hmm.
in peer-reviewed
Hmm.
journals and in different studies, anti-cancer, lowers multiple inflammation, gets deeper in the system because you have a tiny molecule that just goes right through cells and cells take it in and they use it as like, oh, let's detox. Let's,
Mm.
clean out
Okay.
stuff.
And so it can either be in air or it can be mixed in water. So is hydrogen water that does work? Is it just that there's a higher ratio of the hydrogen to the water, so some of the hydrogen remains available?
Yeah,
How's
it's like a
that?
seltzer, it's a hydrogen seltzer. And
Interesting.
so what we have, one woman, her mother's a doc, and her daughter had parasites. And so when we scanned her, found, oh yeah, you have multiple parasites in your gut, and we're doing different treatments, but wasn't really working. She went to Klinghardt, she went to Dr. Hughes, one of these parasite experts, and nothing was really working. And so until they said, well, let's try hydrogen. And so she got a hydrogen unit, started drinking the water, and I get this message that says, oh my gosh, I can't believe the difference in my gut. She'd been chasing treatments for 10 years.
Hmm.
And when she started doing this, she's like, I normally I sleep like 12, 14 hours every day. I
Hmm.
have so much energy right now, I can't sleep. And she kept doing this. And now, instead of chasing treatments, she's now a medical provider in Australia.
Mm. Mm. Remarkable. Uh, Yeah, I think it's Christine Schaffer or Schaefer who I interviewed
Schaffner.
way back at, yeah, pardon me. Thanks
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
the
That's okay.
clarification at the beginning of the podcast, and who's a partner of Klinghardt. And just another really testament to great outcomes is if somebody's already worked with them and then you can use your approach to get them over the finish line. That's I think a remarkable thing as well. So so very cool. Well, last topic for the day then is peptides. Let's talk about those.
So peptides basically are little amino acids that a lot of your body produces already, and they help you to do certain functions like fight infection, detox, cellular repair, regeneration, brain protect, neuroprotection, all sorts of different ones. And now we have different remedy. You can get them in supplement form, many of them. Some compounding pharmacies will make them. However, the FDA a couple years ago kind of tightened the what peptides you could use, so a lot of that had become less available. But now available in supplement form, you can get things to help heal the gut, like BPC 157. One of the other kinds of patients we see is mast cell activation patients because of their exposure to mold and mycotoxins. Their little mast cells, which are part of their immune system, say, "Hey, I got a mold toxin. I got to produce dopamine. I'm gonna." It's really
Hmm.
cool to see it like change on like in the microscope how it degranulates and then releases all this compounds. They can produce like dozens of compounds. And so what we have in patients is they have just elevated levels of histamine, like too much. They're just swimming in it and they come with a red face. They can't eat many foods and their gut's a mess. And so one of the things that hardly helps is a peptide called KPV. And that we also use that with hydrogen because both of those together help lower mast cell activation. KPV stabilizes mast cells from overproducing histamine and other inflammatory compounds. Hydrogen also helps with lowering histamine, and then there's other supplements that help also. And so they're great regulators, and they really help accelerate healing. And then we also test them in the scan. And I have a colleague of mine who helps me with the scan. He's a peptide expert. He's also trained in brain, he's a brain doc.
Hmm.
So, he's taught me a lot. I've
Mm.
learned a lot. Another guy I stand on the shoulders of. And so it's through that We've really, delivered them nasally, orally, topically. Many of these are available not just by prescription, but through supplementation.
Fantastic. Anything you want to share that we didn't get to?
Let's see, what else? So, nanoparticles, hydrogen, microcurrent, what else? Bee venom. So one of the remedies we use is extracted bee venom. Now, we don't sting people because when I was a kid, I got stung by bees and it was like, no. And I had an uncle. He used to work for a government agency called the OSS, and he was their China expert. And then he had arthritis and he would sting himself with bees. And I thought, man, you are nuts. What are you doing there? And when I got irritable bowel, I was just like, oh, crap, I guess he wasn't so crazy. Acupuncture is kind of like that. I'm not ready to sting myself with bees. And then the research, another Klinghardt shared this, it inhibits Borrelia, different multiple protozoa, but not necessarily Babesia, but we say, okay, it's very similar to that. So we use it for Babesia patients, Mycoplasma, and also cuts through biofilms. And so what we do is we're probably one of the only clinics that has patients snort bee venom. Now you have to be very low dose. We mixing it with like sterile saline, and then when it gets in, it creates big Herxheimer reactions, like people feeling like, whoa, like their eyes like pop open and like all this swelling immediately. So we'll do microcurrent therapy to decrease inflammation, toxicity right when we're doing it. We'll do cupping as another therapy to extract toxins, inflammation very quickly. And we can stop those like severe Herx reactions sometimes in as fast as like 15 minutes. And I had one patient, brilliant college kid. He was going to college and he got sick and, basically he had to go home and live and drop out of college. And he was working in a burger joint. And one of his main symptoms was he had very poor short-term memory. And he had memory testing, found that his memories were intact. He just couldn't access them. And so his Lyme doc treated him for Lyme disease. And when we scanned him, he's like, you don't only have Lyme, you have Babesia in your nervous system. And so we did homeopathics, we did herbals, and his memory didn't budge. And I said, okay, we need the big guns here. So we had him snort the bee venom. His head's like, he's all dizzy and like, whoa, what happened? But he's like 20 years old. It's like, that was cool, man. Like, all right. And so, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm fine. He would drive 3 hours down from New Jersey, get treatment, drive 3 hours back. And on the way home, he gets a call from a friend from college. He hadn't talked to him in several years. And he blah, 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 blah. And then calls me up and says, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I talked to this guy. I'm remembering things I haven't remembered in 3 years. This is after one treatment. Thanks. And he kept doing it, and the die-off Herxheimer reaction got less and less, and it became more manageable. So, okay, do it at home on a daily basis. And now he's on the West Coast. He's doing like environmental engineering. He's got his own company. He's got a family, and he's like, no problems. So
awesome. What a great place to wrap up. Total blast talking to you today. I'm just all lit up. Where can people find you, Greg?
LymeResearchCenter.com, and we'll have a free download video that will go deeper into what the remedies and treatments we've talked about at LymeResearchCenter.com/field, FIELD, in all caps. So we can put that in the show notes, and I'll put something together that'll explain not only the scan, the microcurrent, the hydrogen, the bee venom, and microparticles. So we'll just, I don't want to make it too long because then I have to make people make a shorter video, and we'll just highlight those and talk a little more details. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and thanks for your time.
Well, it's been a blast. Thanks, Dr. Rob.
Take care. Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.